Sometimes during the course of the week, a word or an idea pops into my head that kind of takes hold, and I kind of know it's what I want to talk about. Mostly classes kind of arise spontaneously, but this one really felt important. Often the talk that I want to give you is completely played out in the shower the day before, but I want to talk about something I think that's important, and it's called your higher self. Some of you have met your higher self. Some of you have not. Now, the higher self is also called source, that from which you arrive, that which expresses you into the universe. As a child, we are very much in tune with this. We sort of sense it as everything. We don't differentiate ourself from it. Although we begin to do that rather quickly. But mostly, the journey into ego mind, into individualized self, is such a powerful journey, so in some ways essential. It has to happen. It wants to happen. We are driven by all kinds of forces to separate from ourself, to become the person we are. And that person who we are is sent forth to be in the world, to function in the world, and to, in many ways, create the world. We might even be sent forth to destroy the world. And maybe we're a mix of all those energies. But somewhere along the way, usually pretty early on, we forget our higher self. We forget ourself. And we become identified with this manifested ego entity, which is, in having lost its awareness of its parental source, if you will, a little bit alone in the woods, alone on its own, trying to figure out what this is, what we're doing here, how to navigate our way through the uncertainties and the impermanence of our existence. And that lost quality that most of us have begins to meet other lost entities, and we try to create among ourselves a who are we, what are we identity. And we begin to reinforce these things with the help of our biological parents, with the help of our siblings, our friends, our teachers. We start to get an idea of this is who we are. We're an introverted person, we're an extroverted person, we're a male, we're a female, we're a combination of all sorts of elements. We get psychological, theological training in defining that we're Jewish and we're Christian and we're Muslim and we're Buddhist. We have all these names that start to define us, and we become very specific entities. And they all seem to be a little bit separate from the other people around us. And we forget, and by purpose it seems, that we all descend from higher self, that we all come from this singular source. And that forgetting is the source of a great deal of human angst and discomfort, existential suffering. Because we sort of know that no one knows what's going on. No matter what people tell us this is, it doesn't ring completely true. All of your teachers and parents and friends all have answers that you kind of want to sometimes glob onto because at least it's something to hold. But you also sort of feel it doesn't really support you. Somehow or another, something's missing. And the thing that's missing is something you want, kind of something you crave, something you seek continually in life. And you don't always seek it with a kind of intellectual clarity. You perceive it as a kind of feeling your way into life and the world. And sometimes you meet someone who you look at and they reflect something back at you that goes source, connection, something that's important. And also often it's a sexual thing. It's a longing for the otherness. And when you see somebody who in your own mind embodies it, you want to come together. And sex is really an extraordinary way of touching momentarily this explosion of source awareness, of otherness, of bliss, of climactic content. But it doesn't linger very long, it doesn't last, and you want it again, and you want it again. And you may want it continually with one partner, you may want it with multiple partners, but you want that something is exploding you into, ah yes, ah yes. But it's not enough. Because you keep falling back into this miasma of human life. Many cultures have practices, often called mystery practices or cults or training grounds, that used to help push people into remembrance, remembering where you came from, remembering the source, remembering yourself, trying to remember yourself. And they could involve all sorts of things. Often they were simulated deaths. Often they were experiences of enormous pain. All of which tried to guide you into this space. Sometimes you had these journeys all by yourself into the wilderness, trying to find who you are. And every so often, people would come back with, they got it. They saw the truth. They remembered or rediscovered or were reabsorbed by the self. Some people come back from that with a kind of glint in their eyes and remember it and hold on to that memory. Some people come back and all they can do is tell you, I was there, I saw it, but they're not there anymore. There are a lot of plants that are grown in the world that will give you a journey to the self, that will allow you to rocket up into who you truly are. And there are societies around the world that cultivate these plants in order to help you go on that journey. You know, there are mushrooms, there are variations of other formations that will really, really alter your consciousness. In the 50s, LSD was discovered by chance in a laboratory in Switzerland by Dr. Hoffman, and he created this drug, lysergic acid diethylamide, and that drug somehow mimicked these plant drugs, and it blasted you up into yourself. And then you came back. Some people got a full blast into the heart and soul of being, and some got little elevations kind of so they could look at it from a little closer up. Almost any time you get a glimpse, it will change your life. Sometimes it changes your life completely and absolutely and permanently, and sometimes it just says, what was that? And it begins an incredible search for truth, which leads many people to a room like this, where we're sitting trying to find out what this is. And the reason you come to something like this is because meditation classes often come out of sort of religious traditions, especially in the East, where you sit still and you are promised, in a sense, through your stillness, a vision of what they call higher consciousness, or God consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, which for the moment I am going to call the self. You get a vision of, or a connection to, who you are. And it is something for those who have experienced it chemically, let's say, or unexpectedly, just by chance, or who have ritualized a way into getting there. They realize they need more grounding, they need more instruction, they need more practice, they need more help, and so they find this, meditation. This being one of many forms of meditation. But they all promise the same thing. Sit still long enough, and something will open inside you, and you will feel yourself entering into who you are. And you will feel your way in as much as biologically move into it. It's a feeling, it's a sense of having arrived at who you have always been. And it is so exquisitely familiar and beautiful and completing that you want to live there. People want it more than anything. And one of the interesting things about the discovery of the self is how it is in no way a separateness. It's an absolute familiar continuum of you. And that's very, very calming and very affirming for the ego mind. And so we all hunger for this thing, and yet the way it works usually in meditation is you go inside, perhaps let's say on a Sunday morning like this, and you sit there, and somewhere in the middle of this class, if you're lucky, you get 10 or 12 seconds of like, you may get a whole class worth of it. You may get a whole day's worth. Some of you will find this thing, this awareness, lingering for several days to a week or longer. But almost always, ego mind, daily problems and involvements, being involved in creating the world in whatever version of that process you are involved, comes back to you. And there you are, caught in this and forgetting everything about the truth of your greater self, except that it's there. That's what you remember. It's there. And you want it. When you touch yourself, when the self reminds you of its own existence, it brings about it a kind of profound understanding of you. It's kind of parental. It tells you you're really messing up. You're not living right. This is a real bad area in your consciousness. This is a problem. And it does it kind of lovingly and also with a kind of sternness. And it has an absolute wisdom and an absolute awareness of who you are. If you're living a life that is really disordered and problematic, you're not going to want to find yourself. You will see it as punishing, you will see it as frightening. Because it knows you all too well. It knows all about you, everything. And it will not let you forget that it knows. Its primary journey, in a sense, having expelled you into all of this, is to watch you, to govern you as best as possible, to enjoy and experience life with you and through you, and then to bring you back home. But if you have turned so far away from yourself that you are operating independently of that higher consciousness, if you are living a life of me, I, that higher self will not be a friend of yours. And if it's not a friend of yours, it will torment you, or you will feel it as a kind of torment. Some people would call it, the manifestation of it, conscience. And some people in the world today, maybe always, have managed to sever themselves from conscience and have zero connection to the higher self in terms of awareness, day-to-day awareness. Zero. They can act with impunity, it seems, and do anything they want in the world. We see pictures of them on TV. Some very ugly forces at work, because they are completely disconnected from awareness of who they are. Or they live in a false sensibility of knowing who they are, because the collective consciousness of their particular group gives them the power to live any way they want, and as long as they serve the power of the group, they feel whole and protected. But group cohesion is never very strong in the world, and ultimately you leave the world by yourself. And every one of us returns at some point to ourself. Occasionally in life, something happens where the personal ego mind, in its pursuit of the self, falls away. And we call it awakening, and we call it enlightenment, and I talk about it every week. But in the context of what I'm saying, try to understand that what happens is the ego mind just goes, not for 10 seconds, not for 30 seconds, it just falls away. And there you are, in the presence of unflinching, uninterrupted source. You are the higher self. You've always been the higher self, truly. Everyone who's sitting here is that higher self. But the practice of, the distraction of ego-minded self has so obliterated our awareness to that we don't know it. But when that thing pops, And there you are. There's a knowing, there's an awareness of that self. And you begin to understand it in a whole other way than when the practice of the meditative ego-minded self tries to look at it and find it and get a glimpse and another glimpse and another, oh, I see it, I feel it, I'm aware of it. Or the sexual moment where you explode into it for a second, or the dream moment where in your dreams you're in touch with it. Suddenly all of those temporary aspects of trying to get there are gone and you're just there. But not that you're there in some way that says, I'm done, I'm finished. It's kind of the opposite. It's like, I am there, teach me. What am I? I am this self, but it's like it's the beginning of a journey that's not interfered with by interpretive mind forces. It just is. And it is absolute, and it is total, and it is lifting you up and showing you and carrying you, and it's, in a sense, you realize it's representing and expressing itself via you without interruption. You are finished seeking yourself. You have found yourself, but in no way are you done. You are in process. You are on this amazing journey of being alive. You are on this journey of existing with direct connection to what is. And you realize that this infinite, powerful being of you has nothing to do with future or past because they don't exist. There's just this. And this is so amazing and real and powerful and awesome and scary and beautiful and everything there is. And it's exactly what you are. My grandchildren feel it. They're losing connection with it, but they feel it. And I sit with them and I radiate it back and forth. And when I sit with you guys, and for a moment this self taps through me into you. And when I say me, I don't mean Bruce. It's just pouring through this space into you, and it starts to reflect itself, and you get to taste it. You touch it. I know it's in you, and it's working in you very vividly as we sit here. There's no one in this class who doesn't get a moment of visionary truth. It's just there. Whether you are locking into it in your mind and going, oh my God, what did I see? Or whether you're just sitting there in stillness and it's just melting into your system. It's there. It's present. It's present as we speak. It is there in everyone, but almost nobody gets to find it unless they do, crazy things, like vision quests. That's not crazy. Or long pilgrimages, which also isn't crazy really. Or, Indian, hanging by your chest up on a pole and spinning around and having awful suffering experiences. And that brings it to you. Or taking vast quantities of all kinds of drugs over and over to get there. This is just feeding it to you. Rudy used to call it the horizontal and the vertical. You sit in the class and you begin to move up the vertical and you branch out into the horizontal and you're in this space of knowing. And then you meditate some more, you go up the vertical and it branches out into a little bit of a higher space of knowing. And then again, and you practice day after day after day. And what happens when you truly awaken is you don't have to use a chemical to shoot up into higher awareness and infinite consciousness. You don't have to go somewhere and come back. You just build this building. Boom, 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 boom. Up higher and higher, and then you're just living there. You're living in the penthouse of existence. And you are supported with this very powerful structure of spiritual practice that got you there. But then you're just there. Rudy often talked about if and when you build this structure, put dynamite in every floor. Because at some point you need to blow this whole thing up because you do not want to be caught in structure and manifestation. You want to be able to be free of everything. And that's what you're working for. And what you discover in your higher self is it's absolute freedom. Buddha called this process liberation. You get liberated from all of these false identities, all of these hopes of future and fears of past, and all these identities that are not you. They're useful. The universe created you in this ego-minded form to build this world. But then imagine what it's like to have, in a sense, emanated out into the existence of manifested form, and then to have that ego-mind construction worker quality disappear and realize that you don't need it, that you can be this extraordinary living truth acting directly in the world without the mediation of a particular identity. Just your being, direct force, direct higher self or the self, and just allowing you to be the self in life. It's hard to imagine that will ever happen, that the whole world will be filled with conscious self. It's sort of a dream that it could happen, and what that would mean I can't even begin to explain, but I'm starting to meet enough awakened entities to know what communities of awakened consciousness look like. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And every one of you is in process. Every one of you is finding this way of letting go of the separateness that has caused you suffering. You suffer because you know you're not somewhere. You're disconnected. You're not part of what you know you should be or can be or really and truly are. And so what you're learning to do here is to scrub away all of the density of misunderstanding and distraction, to wash it away, to let it flow out of you, to let the energy of the class come into you and participate in that cleansing, because that's what it does. And it works and works and works and works. And after 40 years or 50 years in my case, it finally really delivers. But it took me that long. I wish I could say you sit down and it's done in a week, but you've got millions of years probably of accumulated crap going on inside the system that has to be washed out. And you have to dynamite it, you have to chisel it, you have to sledgehammer it, you have to do everything you can do, and then you get to the fine work, where you take, these tiny little things that have to be worked out, the little knots, the little tensions, the little stuff that's holding you back maybe from a million lifetimes ago, maybe from yesterday. But it's got to be worked out of the system, so there's flow. It just flows. And you flow, and you are completely connected to Source, and you also discover that ego mind keeps reforming. But it reforms not in opposition to or in forgetting the Source. It reforms as a manifestation of Source, and it's all one thing. In other words, you are conscious as your ego mind of your service to and oneness with and connection with all there is. So it's not like you come into the awakening and suddenly have no ego. You now have an ego that's totally aligned with and at peace with all that is. And if it's not at peace with it, it's working to help free you even more deeply, and it's working to help others. And why it's working like that, I have no idea. Why we are here to help each other through this, I don't know. But that's its primary purpose. That's all I can tell you. When I came back from my LSD trip 50 years ago in July, I said, why am I back? Why am I back from this unbelievable awareness? Why am I back in the world? And it said one thing to me, and it's really interesting because it said something. My higher self said something, and it said, you're here to tell people what you saw. And every so often it would remind me, and one of the times it did was in the desert in Afghanistan, on my way to India to find out more about this self. I'm living in a in a mud hut, not living, I was sleeping in a mud hut with 3 walls and no ceiling and no other 4th wall. And I'm lying in a sleeping bag looking at the sky and the stars of Afghanistan. And my higher self came to me and said, "You are going to have stories to tell." And then I'm lying on a boat in the Ganges in Benares, Varanasi, in the most amazing city, the oldest city still inhabited on the planet. And I'm lying there on this boat, having just ingested opium. And I'm there, and opium is a very interesting drug, and it was the only way I had to sleep on a hard floor. And so when I would take the opium, the floor would get softer and softer and softer, and I had this beautiful sleep. And about 5 a.m. it got harder and harder and harder, and I woke up. And I was lying there, and it said to me, "Create a masterpiece." That your ticket was to create a masterpiece. And then it absolutely kind of left me. And I was on this journey, and I went, I couldn't find a teacher. I couldn't find anyone to teach me about this stuff. I couldn't find my own voice, but I'm looking for a teacher in the horizontal because I don't have the vertical. Mm-hmm. And I go to all these teachers, and I've told you stories about, so many teachers, and none of them were my teacher. And I said, I said literally to them, "You're not my teacher. And I don't know where my teacher is." And then I make this bizarrely classical journey all the way around the world until I'm 4 blocks from where Rudy lives or works, and then I go those 4 blocks and I meet Rudy. And he said, "What were you doing in India?" I said, "I went to find a teacher." He said, "Did you find one?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, I can teach you everything you want to know." And it was true. I knew it. But I had to do this journey. What do you think led me on that journey? The search for myself. I went around the world to find myself, and where was the key to that journey? 4 blocks away. We've heard that in classical literature all the time. The thing you're looking for is right there. But you can't just find it like that. You have to go like this. When you awaken, you discover that everything you've been looking for has always been under your feet. You've heard that from the beginning. Click your shoes together. Click, click, click. I want to go home. I want to go home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. You're home. You've always been there. Always. But you can't know that until you go all around the world looking for the teacher you need to find where you've always been. That's the journey we're on. We're all looking for the higher self. That higher self has never been anywhere but here. Ever. And when you finally have made the journey and earned the right, have done the pilgrimage, have done what you needed to do, done the vision quest, after all of that, this higher self looks at you and smiles upon you. It says, "You've done good work. You did what was required. You did the thing that needed to be done. You journeyed to me. You found me. You found me not in the world of stuff, but in the transcendence, if you will, of the world. You returned to me, and now I am with you always." That's really what happens. And then you are with this source in the world, making speeches like this. And this speech is, you guys know Bruce. Bruce doesn't know that any of this stuff as such. This stuff is pouring through Bruce, who spent 50 years searching for this very thing that now speaks to you. Of course, it's Bruce, in the same way it will be you, but it's also the singular source, not of Bruce, but of each one of us. Every one of you who arrives back at source, at yourself, at your own self, will know everything I'm saying and find your own way of saying it to the world. It may be an eloquent speech, it may be an eloquent heart, it may be a way of just touching someone on the shoulder. You will find an ability to serve the world in exactly the way it wants you to serve the world, without any of the confusion of ego mind. And that's what we're here to find, and that's what this class is about. And your journey to find this class is essential to the process. And I really do believe, based on how earnest and how hungry and how needy you are, this will come to you. It comes to you, not, I can't give it to you, nobody can give it to you, but you're having sat here year after year or whatever it is, finally you will feel like, I made the effort. I showed up. I showed up over and over and over. And it knows it. It knows it. Trust me. You have no idea how deeply it knows it. I used to go to the dentist office and get nitrous oxide. And I used to use that as a kind of, because I don't do drugs anymore for 50 years almost. I don't use drugs, so I would have this moment, I would do nitrous oxide for my teeth. I didn't really need it. But it would be my journey up back into the self. And in the early days, it was a little bit like LSD. It was like, oh yeah, I'm back. And you always remember, it's like, oh yes, this. Oh yes, yes. And it was always wonderful and reaffirming. Recently, I had to go to the dentist and I needed nitrous oxide, and they gave it to me, and it was like nothing happened. It's like, there I am. There I am. This is not, the vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, there you are. You're just there. That's where you live. And at one point, as I said earlier, the whole thing will explode and there will be nothing left except what is the self. The self is left. I believe it's left. I won't be able to come back and tell you if I'm right or wrong. But if it's not left, well then fine. And if it is left, wow. Wow. We're so lucky. Walt Whitman said, death is other than what you think and luckier. That's exactly how I feel. You go back to yourself. We're all on that journey, and none of us are more than 1/1000th of a millimeter away from that self. 1/1000th of a millimeter. You're walking with yourself, you're talking to yourself, you're in yourself, you're of yourself. Everything around you is yourself. Every person you see is yourself. It is nowhere that it's not. The only thing that's wrong is you're too distracted to see it. You're just too distracted. You're too self-involved in your suffering and your misery at not being connected. Stop being miserable, stop being disconnected, connect and find the joy of being who you are. It's not, I was going to say it's not hard. It took me 50 years. And it may have taken me 50 million lifetimes, I don't really know. But whatever it is, keep on trucking, because that's the only way to get there. Keep on reaching, asking, hoping, praying, meditating, whatever it takes, it is worth the journey. It is worth every step. So, any questions? Okay. Please listen to what I'm saying. It's important.